Hello and welcome back to the channel, guys. We've got tons to get through, so we're not going to waste too much time. But in this video, we're going to be looking at what the best entry-level Canon camera is for 2026. And it's the Canon R7, and it has absolutely blown me away. I'm going to be honest, I thought I was going to pick this camera up, do a review with it, and then perhaps move it on to somebody else. But this has potentially earned its right in my camera bag, and to be my backup shooter, because it was nothing short of amazing. So, let's get after it. Okay, so you might remember earlier on in the year, I did a video at the start, I think it was about January, February, where I stated that the Canon R5 was the best beginner camera for this year. Now, I obviously got quite a bit of flack in the comments about the price of that, and I wasn't really trying to say that that was the only entry-level camera. I suppose I maybe never got my message across, which was basically say, don't be put off by the fact it's a flagship camera and all its bells and whistles. It was still a really easy camera to use. Fantastic results, and one of the reasons it's so easy to use and why the Canon R7 felt so comfortable to me is because of Canon's design language and the way that they lay out their menus. They're very straightforward, and probably out of all of the manufacturers, they're the ones that make the most sense. Well, at least to me anyway. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the R5, so let's look a little bit deeper at this thing. Before we start, this video isn't sponsored. I may be wearing the Canon sweatshirt, but I promise you, I bought the camera with my own money and also a couple of lenses. I bought this one, which is on the camera. It's a 24-105, and it cost about £230. And I bought this, the plastic fantastic nifty 50, and I think that cost me £199. So that, coupled with the body, which I got for £850, all of it comes in for under £1,500. And for something that you might be seriously considering about getting into, I don't think £1,500 is too much money to drop on something that might become the best hobby that you've ever had. Now, if you compare that to this one lens, the Moon Bazooka, that I've got for my Canon R5, this cost £3,300. So I could have bought the entire R7 setup and two lenses twice over and then still had some money left. But there's an even better thing, because although this is R7, it is based on Canon's RF mount, and that means that this fits this body. And I'll show you a couple of images that I've taken with that setup later on in the video. It's mind-blowing. And before we move on, it's really worth labouring that point, because the R7 body gives you access to all of Canon's RF lenses. And as you can see in the screen just now, there are tons of them. Yeah, when we first started out and these things were new, there wasn't too many of them kicking about, but there's even some Sigma third-party lenses that you can buy that are cheaper than these ones here, but slightly better. But the whole point of this today was to show you what you can achieve with a cheap lens, a fairly cheap camera body, and just a good eye for photography. I think it's fair to say that most people, when they take up photography, it's because they've been out with their mobile phones, they've managed to capture some nice shots, and they think they're quite good at it, and therefore they want to maybe explore the world of photography. And that's fantastic. That's how it was for me. But what happens with the mobile phone is, you very quickly outgrow it. And one of the things that kinda is a drawback in mobile phone photography is the software is doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to processing your images. And that's why they look so good straight out the mobile phone. The software in there makes sure that the shadows aren't too dark and the highlights aren't blown out, and it adds a lot of colour, so it's very pleasing to the eye. But as I said, that soon becomes limiting, and what you're going to need is a camera body that has interchangeable lenses. As I mentioned, this is a 24-105, and I've got a 50mm, I've got a 50mm one there, I've got a 50mm lens there, and this big thing here is 100-500, and that's a super tele zoom lens that you can see pretty much into next week with. So yeah, interchangeable lenses, that's where it's at. Lastly, before we dive into what this thing can do, I think it's really important to talk about why the Canon R7 and why Canon as a company as a whole is something that I think you should seriously consider. And the first and foremost thing about that is the ergonomics of the camera. There's nice rounded curves on the Canon bodies. They sit beautifully in my hands anyway, and all the buttons and dials are all exactly where I need them to be. And that makes shooting an absolute pleasure. If you're having to hunt, you don't know where your buttons are, and you're spending most of your time looking at the camera, then you're going to miss the shot. And I find Canon is particularly great at feeling comfortable, especially if you're shooting all day. Secondly, it's well known that Canon has amazing straight out of the camera colours. Their colour science is probably second to none. And if you're starting out by just shooting JPEGs, then that's really going to help you out. I shoot in RAW, and that's something we'll talk about later on, because I like to edit my photographs afterwards, and that's where I start to add my little flair and get my own personal style. But again, if you're moving from a mobile phone to a proper mirrorless camera, there's nothing wrong with shooting JPEG until you find your way about. And lastly, I personally just think Canon's a super cool brand. Now, I'm not being a fanboy here, and Sony make phenomenal cameras, Fujifilms, Leica, if you're lucky enough to afford one of them. They're all fantastic cameras that you buy these days. But for me, there's just something about a Canon camera, and that's why I'm drawn to them, and I will probably never change. Probably. If you're enjoying the video, guys, please consider giving me a like, or even better, subscribe. And if you're looking to take your photography one step further, I've just released a new ebook called You're Not a Tourist, which is all about composition, because if you hang about this channel for any length of time, you'll know that composition is everything. So I would recommend download the ebook, have a look through it, because it's packed with tips and tricks on how to compose your images so that your photography is as good as it can be. The links are in the description, and you can also find it on my website at www.davidmuirphotography.com. That's a shameless plug over. Sorry. Okay, so let's look at the specs of this thing and why I think you should consider it for your first entry-level camera. Now, it's not going to be a deep technical review because you can get tons of them online. I just want to try and put this in simple layman's terms so that if you have never really used a mirrorless camera before, you're not going to be too daunted by it. So let's move on to the first and probably the most important part of the camera, and that's its sensor. Now, the Canon R7 uses what's called an APS-C crop sensor, and basically it just means it's slightly smaller than that of my R5, which is a full frame sensor. Now, that has some drawbacks, but it also has some benefits too. But let's talk about what one of the drawbacks is. If you've got a slightly smaller sensor, it can't gather as much light as a full frame sensor, obviously. And where that really sort of hampers the camera a little bit is when you have to start cranking up the ISO or the ISO, because it can introduce some noise into the darker areas. But I must admit, from the photographs you're going to see today, it was 15 minutes after sunset and it was quite dim, and I'm really impressed with how this handled the noise. Another potential drawback for other manufacturers is that they don't let their full frame lenses fit onto an APS-C body. But one of the main benefits of having an APS sensor is when you put something like the 100 to 500 onto this body, it actually gives you more reach because it's putting that image onto a smaller sensor. So by the time you blow it up on your screen, it's about a 1.5 times magnification. And you can see that right here when I compare this photograph of the plane with this photograph of the plane. It's the same body, same camera, but the lenses are different. And if you so wish to upgrade your camera to ridiculously priced lenses, then you can do that. So the camera will grow with you. It doesn't mean that you just buy this, the kit lens, and that's you. There is great flexibility in this system. The next thing about this is that the camera has all the modes that you would expect from a professional body. So whether you want to shoot in full auto until you find your feet, there are other modes though that can help you get there quicker, such as aperture priority or shutter priority, where you set the creative element of the camera and then you let the camera work everything else out for you. And if you're feeling brave and you want to go one step further, you can put it into full manual mode and you can set all the settings of the camera. And as I've said, the buttons are laid out really, really easy, so it becomes a bit of a breeze to do that. But that said, if you've watched some of my other videos, there's really no reason to shoot in manual all the time, and aperture priority is where I live 80% of the time. Again, another thing that you would find in a professional body is it has 2 memory card slots. So you can pop that in, put another one in, and basically you can choose how the camera works with that. So you can have what's called redundancy and have the same image that you take go to both cards, so that if one fails, you know you've got a backup. or you can set it to overflow mode so that when you fill one card, it just automatically goes on to the next one. And again, that's a really nice thing to have. A lot of entry-level cameras, they have one slot. There is a slightly cheaper Canon camera if you're starting out, and that's the R10. But again, for the difference in price, I wouldn't recommend going there because it doesn't have the same setup and the same professional functions as the R7 does. Another thing you'll find on the R7 is it has a fully articulating LCD screen on the back. And again, you don't find that on all entry-level cameras. And what's really great about that is, depending on how you're shooting, you can manipulate the camera so that you can always see what the camera is looking at. So if you're shooting up high over a crowd, you can tilt it back down so you're looking up at it. And conversely, if you're shooting something really low down in the ground, you can turn it, tilt it, and make sure that you've got the thing framed correctly. Again, when I do videos like this, I can rotate the whole thing all the way around so that as I'm looking at the camera, I can still see that I'm framed correctly, I hope. It also has a digital hot shoe on the top. If you take the plastic holder out, you can then fit a variety of attachments in here. Canon do their own microphone, which plugs straight in there, and because it's digital, you don't need any additional cables to plug into the microphone jack on the side. But that also means that you can use third-party ones. I use the Rode Mic NTG, and I plug it into the top, and I use a small jack cable to plug it into the camera for my audio. So again, you can have flashes on there. There's lots of different things that you can fit on that. So again, another nice thing to have. And if you're looking to shoot video, it's no slouch either. But I will be upfront, it's probably starting to get a little bit dated if video is your primary function. It does shoot 4K oversampled from 7K down to 4K, so you get a really sharp image, but it only does that at 30 frames per second. You can shoot 4K at 60 frames per second, but if you want to go into super slow motion, then it drops all the way down to 1080p. But again, I don't really shoot 120 frames per second. 60 frames per second is usually enough to get me slow motion, but there is that time that when you want to be super creative, that really slow motion really kicks ass. So if you're thinking about going out to shoot wildlife, you'll be well catered for with this, because it shoots 15 frames per second with the mechanical shutter and up to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter. So that means you can set burst mode, hold in the button, and it's just going to fire off shots so that you don't miss that moment when the owl leaves the branch, or the fish leaps from the sea, or the horse gallops over the gate. Or the next great thing about this camera is it has in-body image stabilization, and if you're just starting out, your technique might not be great, and when you're holding the camera you might shake about a little bit, but the camera will try and iron some of that out for you. And if you couple it with a lens that has stabilization, the two of them work together in tandem. But for £199, this lens... Oh, it does have stabilisation. My apologies. There you go, £200 and a stabilised lens. And the two of these things will work together so that when you hold it up to your eye, you've got a great chance of getting a nice sharp shot. So hopefully you can see, this isn't a toy, this is a serious bit of kit. And if you're serious about photography, then this is something that you should really consider. And getting into the Canon ecosystem, as I said, is just a win-win situation. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time using this camera, and I'm really looking forward to maybe upgrading some of the lenses on it, or using some of the lenses I've already got, because I know I'm going to get some really great images with this. And you can too. So it's all well and good me telling you how good it is, but the proof of the pudding is in how good the images look. So we're going to pop some up on the computer, and I'll talk you through what I was thinking when I took them and what my impressions are when I got them back and started really pixel peeping and editing them in Lightroom. Okay, so I'm going to be honest, I must admit I wasn't expecting too much because I knew I was using an £850 camera body and coupling it with a £230 lens. But what I found was that the more that I started to use it, I started to forget that it wasn't my Canon R5. Because the body feels premium, there's a good weight to it, and as already mentioned, the buttons are all in the right place, and it felt like a very similar shooting experience. Now I think it's fair to say, none of these images are my best work, and they're definitely not going to win any awards, but I think they competently show just how good this camera is. I tried to get as many different types of shot as possible, from architecture, to framing this pylon to get an idea of depth of field, to check the textures, to see how good the detail is, because one of the things with a £230 lens is they can be quite soft. But I think this photograph really shows off what the camera is capable of, and I think the textures in the tree speak for themselves. Again, I tried to get the aperture as wide open as possible here to get another idea of what the depth of field is like, and again, I was pleasantly surprised. Here's another example of architecture, and again using the Tilton screen, pointed it straight up, and I really love this shot. I think the way it falls off into the distance is great. As I already mentioned, I'm shooting after sunset here, and the moon is out, and I think the noise performance here is incredibly strong. It's a clean image. Another test of the depth of field here. I tried to frame the image to see if I could blow out the background, and whilst the bokeh is probably not as pleasing as the R5, it's still more than passable. One last shot of the big house before we go, and whilst I have edited it, you can see that the colours are very natural and not oversaturated. But here's the big one. Let's put the big 100 to 500 on and take a photograph of the moon. But it can't be all good news, can it? I've already talked about there's a little bit of a downside to the APS-C sensor, and you can get a little bit of extra noise compared to like the R5, but it is completely manageable. But there's a couple other things that I do want to mention. Now, given that this is an entry-level camera, it does have weather sealing in it, but it's not probably as robust as the R5. So would I take this out in torrential rain for any length of time? Probably not. Light rain, drizzle, definitely. But if I'm going to be going out shooting and I know that the weather's terrible, then I'm going to get a plastic cover for it to make sure that I don't wreck the thing. And the last thing, again we've already mentioned, is if it is mainly for shooting video, it's going to be great for starting out, but it is starting to show its age a little bit, and there are other cameras out there that have more options available for shooting. But again, it's absolutely fine for what I need. So is this still worth it in 2026? I certainly think so. And this is something that, as I've already said, is going to be in my bag for next year. It's going to be my backup shooter. I'm going to use it to film my videos. I'm going to use it with the bigger lenses to get more reach. I just think it's an absolutely tremendous camera, and it's a phenomenal deal. And with Christmas just round the corner, I hope you're starting to feel a little bit excited and get this on your list. So now that you know that this is the camera for you, you're going to need to know how to use it. And I would watch this video here because I go over all sorts of compositional techniques to show you how to get the most out of your camera. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video, which will be coming really soon. Bye.